Hare Krishna, Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha, Patitanam Pavanebhyo, Vaishnavebhyo, Namo Namaha. Hare Krishna. I'd like to welcome everyone for this very important discussion on the topic of reading Srila Prabhupada's books every day. Today for this discussion, we have the great honor to welcome a personality who wears many hats in ISKCON. Our guest today is an honorable GBC member. He also happens to be a minister for law and the minister for this Ministry of Education. A disciple of His Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada, who's been associated with this movement for many decades and has helped us all in various areas of ISKCON. I'd like to welcome His Grace Sesa Prabhu. Hare Krishna, Sesa Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Sesa Prabhu, thank you for taking out the time to speak to us under the shelter of divine grace, right on top of you, with a beautiful, very beautiful, presumably it seems like a hand sketch, which looks like a hand sketch. Wow. Well, it reinforces how long back your relationship with His Divine Grace goes. Sesa Prabhu, first of all, I'd like to extend a thank you on behalf of the ministry, your ministry, where you spearheaded and actually supported us in putting forward this proposal and getting this proposal through to encourage devotees to read Prabhupada's books every day and to undertake this project called Books Are the Basis. Sesa Prabhu, you've been reading Srila Prabhupada's books for many years, but we would like to hear from you when and what was your very first encounter with Srila Prabhupada's transcendental books?
I'll be happy to to talk about that topic, Mr. Prabhu. Let me first start by also offering my obeisances to all the devotees and thanking you for continuing the work on this program and for giving me the opportunity to speak. I have a very interesting story, at least I think it's interesting because it's my own, but an interesting story about coming in contact with Srila Prabhupada's books for the first time. I spent my last few years at home in Albany, New York, which is about 120 miles north of New York City. And on the occasion of the wedding of one of my friends, I traveled to New York City for that wedding. And on the way back, I took the bus. And so on the way back, I went to the Port Authority bus terminal in New York. And this Port Authority bus terminal is where the devotees used to go to distribute books in New York City from the old Brooklyn Temple. And so as I was passing through there, I noticed that there was a young lady and she was talking to someone. And in her hand, I could see a book that looked very familiar to me. So I stopped and I waited. I actually waited for her to finish speaking with the person she was talking to. And then I went up to her and I asked her, pointing to what is Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is, and I asked her, what's that you got there? And so she started explaining to me the Bhagavad Gita. And during our conversation, I got a little voice in my head that said, you should give this person all of your money. And so I thought, okay, I can do that. And so I checked to make sure I had my bus ticket home, but then I gave her all of the money I had. And in return, she gave me not only the Bhagavad Gita, but a couple of volumes from second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, 5 or 6 Back to Guided magazines. We had to go to her locker, and she cleaned out her locker and gave me all these books. And when I got on the bus, I was sort of perusing Bhagavad Gita, and one mysterious-looking Indian fellow passed me by, and he saw what I was reading, and he told me, "Good luck on your journey." So from that point on, the journey was there with Srila Prabhupada's books for me. And so it's continued in such a tight way that that young lady, the Sankirtan devotee, the Sankirtan Mataji, Ragatmaka Devi Dasi, she now lives across the street from me. So I take her as my Vartman Pradakshina guru because she showed me the path by giving me Srila Prabhupada's books. And the very next weekend, the devotees came to Albany where I was living, and I joined up with them. So, and of course, joining ISKCON means you're connected with reading Srila Prabhupada's books, hopefully every day. And so that's how it started for me. And
Which
I'm
year
reminded
was
of that
this,
every time
Prabhu?
I see my neighbor. I didn't hear you?
Which year was this, Prabhu?
That was 1973.
1973. You mentioned, Prabhu, so many interesting things. You mentioned that you when you looked at the lady, she was carrying a book which looked familiar. Did you have any previous familiarity with Srila Prabhupada's books or spiritual books per se?
I think that my brother, who went to college in New York City, I think he got a book, a small book, Perfection of Yoga, and in the back there was an advertisement for Bhagavad Gita as it is. I happened to pick up that book in our what used to be our joint bedroom, my brother and I. And in the back of that book, Perfection of Yoga, there was this advertisement for Bhagavad Gita, so I recognized it from just flipping through that book also.
Wow. And that image was ever fresh in your mind.
I guess
Quite
so.
an
It's Krishna's
interesting.
mercy.
Yes, yes, and it seems like in that one instance, the way you describe it, it was the Paramatma speaking into your ears that you must give all your money. There's the devotee of Krishna, and in a third validation where somebody comes and, I mean, I would, as they say in colloquial ISKCON language, that my hair would stand at end if somebody passes me by completely unknown and says, all the best for your journey. It's quite spooky
Yeah.
and in a nice way. In a nice way.
It was an amazing exchange, but strange but true.
Yes, yes. I'm also curious to ask you. Two things crossed my mind. One could be either you were a very rich man at that point in time with lots of money, or perhaps a similar voice from the Paramatma crossed through the Mataji's mind to give you so many books. That seems extraordinary. So which one was it?
Well, I can't say. I'll ask her that the next time I talk to her. But she was very enthusiastic and remains enthusiastic both about distributing and reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And she definitely went out of her way to help me on my journey by taking me to her locker and getting additional books for me and setting me on the path.
Yes, in the previous interviews, most devotees have mentioned, again in a nice way, how they would get a book and the expected reciprocation from the devotees from them would be a lot of Lakshmi to be given. In this case, you given lots of books were given. So I was curious for that fact, nothing else, nothing else. But
Well, I
I'll
can't
be very
remember how
keen to
much I
hear.
gave her.
But I'll be very keen to know when you speak to her what really inspired her. That would be interesting. And if it was Paramatma's voice for her as well, wow, that's some reciprocation. But
That's
I
mercy.
believe, Prabhu, all of us are touched by Srila Prabhupada's books in a little way, maybe not such an intense way like you got the mercy, but we're all touched in some way or the other. In 1973, just within a week of picking up Srila Prabhupada's books, and the devotees come and you join them. Were you, from the point when you started to read in the bus to the point when you actually met the devotees again, is there something that you remember in reading the first few readings of the pages of Srila Prabhupada's Transcendental Purports, which touched your heart or inspired you?
Oh, well, something specific. I don't think I could remember anything specific, although one point that was running through my mind, and it may have been planted there by reading Prabhupada's books, was that just give this one life, give your life to Krishna, and just try it out. I got that sense as I began to associate with the devotees, as I got their association. Just give this one life. You've had so many. Just give this one life to Krishna, and that sort of inspired me to move on and associate on a daily basis with the devotees.
Prabhu, it seems that in the 60s and 70s, many devotees who came in touch with Srila Prabhupada's books, like your good self, actually gave their life just by reading Srila Prabhupada's books. What was special then? What was really happening, which inspired devotees to this extent? Because it may not be true to that extent now in terms of the number of devotees who are really, giving up everything, just coming in touch with these instructions and wanting to give their life to serve Krishna. Something that you could share with us?
Well, I think people were for searching what to do with their life. All of a sudden, all of the goals and aspirations which we grew up with were no longer relevant. Our friends were dying in Vietnam. Society was chaotic. A lot of social, political upheaval, racial injustice being confronted. And I think that all those questions, although in one sense they aren't, say, like the subject matter of the philosophy of the personality of Godhead that we read in Prabhupada's books, still Prabhupada's books and talking about those things, the spiritual goal and spiritual values in life, gave some light on the darkness that was otherwise surrounding our lives and the mystery of where to go and where to dedicate ourselves. And so I think that reading anything in Prabhupada's books, even if it's seemingly unrelated, by Krishna's potency, you could understand how this was a solution to all of the difficulties that we are experiencing in society at that time.
Yes. So in one way, the unfavorable circumstances from an external perspective made it very favorable and made devotees open, or people in general open, to receive Srila Prabhupada's words with an open mind and open heart. Prabhu,
Right.
when you joined the temple, or you started associating with the devotees in the 70s, could you share with us what was then the culture around reading Srila Prabhupada's books or assisting in the production of Srila Prabhupada's books, so on and so forth? What was it like in a typical temple, in a typical day? How much time would devotees engage in hearing from Srila Prabhupada's books?
Well, I think that there was basically a standard program, a morning and evening program that was going on. But I think that maybe just as we'll find today throughout ISKCON, in some places and some individuals emphasize those things more than others. For instance, where I was in Albany, there was just a small, basically a householder couple was sent there to try to open the temple. And it was just them and maybe one brahmachari. So there wasn't a big temple program or anything like that. But I think that the devotees got inspiration from Prabhupada's books and were doing things which are quite extraordinary. And where do you get the strength to go out and just be dropped off someplace in a city that there are no devotees and you have no fixed means of support and everything? I think the surrender of those early devotees was evidence of the fact that they were, at least to some degree, reading Prabhupada's books and taking inspiration from them, because there was nothing else really to draw that inspiration. Prabhupada was traveling the world. We were seeing him, every day. And in this situation, a small temple, not a lot of devotees with big kirtans and everything, but still a strong pioneering spirit was coming through the message. And so I would attribute that to Srila Prabhupada's books and the study and the reading of Srila Prabhupada's books that was going on. And we would have from time to time, I remember at one point Hridayananda Maharaj came in through and visited the temple there in Albany. And of course, he's always been very intellectually strong and fixed himself in Prabhupada's books. And so he comes through as a traveling scholar, really. Sannyasi, I didn't know what a sannyasi was, but a traveling scholar he comes through. I can understand that. And it was obviously based in his involvement with Prabhupada's books.
Most definitely, Prabhu. A lot of times as we hear from all of you, that it's one's practice, one's activities, they speak louder than words. And in this case, it seems clear that the surrender was arising from what we call as Srila Prabhupada's Vani, where it was mostly received through books. When new books were coming out from Srila Prabhupada, what was the mood when new books would arrive at your temple?
Well, let me go just a little bit beyond the temple to answer that question, Tavamishra Prabhu, because that situation lasted only for a few months. And then the devotees left the town where I was and they moved to Washington, D.C. And I followed them about a month later. Oh. Now there was a bigger, more developed temple, more devotees, more structured classes and everything. But one thing that was coming down from Srila Prabhupada and circulating among the devotees is that he wanted more classes every day for studying his books. And so there was all of a sudden this tug between going out on Sankirtan and having classes in the temple. And so there was definitely a turn towards more thorough study of Srila Prabhupada's books as time went on. Of course, my own personal situation, I was there in Washington, D.C. temple for a certain amount of time. We were led by a sannyasi, Rupanuga Prabhu, who was sannyasi at that time. And so he also a very scholarly gentleman. He also emphasized Prabhupada's books. And he sent me to join the BBT library party, where our service was to place Srila Prabhupada's books in libraries and universities all over the US and then eventually all over the world. And so obviously we wanted to place them there so they would be read by generations of students to come. And so reading Prabhupada's books became a factor in temples, as I explained, as well as in our individual Sankirtan efforts on the library party.
Historically, Prabhu, it seems like around the same time when Srila Prabhupada himself, His Divine Grace, started to emphasize those popular letters like churn, now it's time to churn the milk, 73, 74, around the same time it seems.
Yes, And that churning meant studying the philosophy, studying his books, and in that way becoming fixed, rather than just, or I should say, in addition to sort of a popular kind of attraction to the bliss of it all.
Prabhu, being part of the BBT library party, going to centers of learning, going to universities and various places to actually place Srila Prabhupada's books, it's must, and I'm presuming this, but must seem like just creating a temple of Srila Prabhupada's books in each of these locations. I mean, just the way you describe it sounds so ecstatic. How was it? What would you feel each time when you approach, get some success in placing the books? What sort of interactions would you have? Because these are presumably students around you, people who learn and read so many books. Please share something about that with us.
Okay, I'll tell you a story that still amazes me to this day and proves that all the devotee services are directly being assisted by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. One college I went to was in the mountains of Colorado. I think it was called Fort Lewis College. And not in a metropolitan area, not in a very populated area of the United States, but a good liberal arts college there, Fort Lewis College. And so I went, our practice was on a library party, we would go to a campus, and the first thing we go to the library to talk to the librarians, telling them that we're going to be on campus today, visiting professors, and if they are interested in our books, we show them a catalog, then we're just letting you know so that you can be prepared to get their order. And we'll be back later in the afternoon to talk with you. So I went around talking with professors that day. Then I came back to the library with some orders for the professors. And I met the head librarian. And when I was talking with him, he looked at me rather curiously or strangely. And he said to me, do you know that my favorite book is Srimad Bhagavatam? And, first what happened was he extended his hand in a fist across the desk. And he said, do you know what that is? He was referring to his ring. And I was so bewildered by the whole situation. I thought, what does he mean? Do I know what that is? Is he going to punch me or something? But it turned out that what he was showing me was an Om ring, a ring made in the shape of Om. And then he told me that, as I said, Srimad Bhagavatam is his favorite book. And he explained that during World War II, he was in the war theater that comprised of Eastern India. In World War II, some fighting was there, or some supply trains or something was there, so that soldiers from the United States were assigned in that area. And he told me that during that time, he came in contact with Srimad Bhagavatam and was reading it regularly from that time on in his life. This was in the 70s, that was obviously in the 40s. And so the man had been reading, unfortunately, not Srila Prabhupada's books, Srimad Bhagavatam translation, because it wasn't manifest yet, but he had been reading Srimad Bhagavatam for all these decades, and he proclaimed it as a librarian. This was his famous book, his favorite book. And so he immediately signed up the standing order for his library to receive all the publications of the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust written by Srila Prabhupada. And so that was probably one of the most jarring, surprising, and fulfilling experiences I had on the library party.
I'm sure, Prabhu. It reminds me of the verse, Pangum Langaite Girim, on the top of a mountain in Colorado, on a university, and you get to actually just jump over it and conquer it. Prabhu, so this person, I'm curious to ask, was he a Western body person, or was he somebody from
Yeah,
the Oriental
yes, a
culture
Western
that
body. No, Western body, American.
wearing an Om ring and reading
Yeah,
Bhagavatam?
right.
Wow, what a reciprocation! We are never alone, it seems. Like you said, Mahaprabhu's reciprocation there, there. Prabhu, would you also in this service, while at the library, etc., would people ask you about the books? Because these are intellectuals, right? Professors, dealing with them must not be easy. It's not, I don't want to undermine, but sometimes when one is distributing on the street to common people, you have the sense, okay, it's all right. They're not going to ask you a very heavy philosophical question. You can say a few words. Um, how was it to interact with these professors? Some of them, I'm sure, were professors in theology, religion, etc. Where did you get the strength to be able to stand in front of these academically sound, well-learned people and be there in the present and say, okay, I'll be able to answer?
Well, I mean, obviously, one would have to be reading Srila Prabhupada's books to do this service, because when you're showing the books, there's bound to be some questions. Of course, that's true for any type of Sankirtan. Prabhupada wanted the devotees to read the books, otherwise what we say to people when we interact with them. And certainly academics would from time to time, I recall one time in college in Arizona, the professor actually had a bias towards the impersonal understanding of Bhagavad Gita and other Vedic literatures. And so we got into a little debate. I always felt a little bit not prepared for those debates with professors, but we were sort of forced into that service. And so we prepared for it by reading Prabhupada's books. And so when this professor challenged with an impersonal understanding, who was I? I was just a young brahmachari, but I replied to him the best I could. I don't know if I changed his mind or everything, but certainly I couldn't couldn't say nothing. I had to say something, because if they blaspheme Krishna or Prabhupada, we can't just stand by and not say anything. So I tried to recall what I had read in Prabhupada's books and to repeat that in the face of this professor's objections. So from time to time, we'd have those type of encounters. But most time, people were fascinated. I had an experience where I was showing a professor, I believe it was, it must have been 7th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. And in there's a verse that talks about how learned societies operate or conduct themselves. And it was talking obviously about learned societies amongst materialists. And so how they conduct themselves is by fighting and bad behavior and all these things like that. And when the professor read this verse, he got so excited, because in their own little learned society there among the faculty members, he recognized all these same things, fighting and pride and all these kind of things that were bad qualities of so-called learned people. So he wanted to take the book so he could Xerox that page and paste it on his door, and as sort of protest against the kind of uncivil dealings they had amongst themselves. So there were a lot of experiences out there directly relating to Prabhupada's words when we were interacting with the professors.
And quite thought-provoking as well. I mean, where else in the world would anybody be talking so candidly and exposing what happens in learned societies? And I mean, mostly the people would, when they talk about it, they'll talk about with respect, wanting to only glorify them. But to be able to touch the pulse so succinctly, and where there's a reciprocation, the professor wants to put it on his faculty meeting room. Many experiences like this, right, Prabhu? Many experiences like this.
If you have time, I can tell you one more story, which is
Of
probably the
course,
most inspiring, and it deals
please.
with directly reading Prabhupada's books.
Yes.
I was at the University of Montana. Now, if you know anything about the geography of the United States, Montana is a relatively remote state, not population-wise much less than other states, although it's a big landmass. So at the University of Montana, I was there. And we had been there the previous year. So I went back and we had sold them the complete sets of Prabhupada's books. So now they were on the shelf in the library. So I thought, let me go and check and see how, Prabhupada's books are doing. Visit that Tirtha in the library there. So I went there and I began to look at each volume, starting first canto, part 1, part 2, part 3. And in those days, they still had the system in libraries where there was a card in the back.
Yes.
You had to sign it out, and there was a return date and all that. So to my surprise and great satisfaction, and I offer this to Srila Prabhupada, as I went through the books, I saw that one individual was reading each book successively. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Part 1, his name was there with a date checked out, check in. The next volume 2 was checked out at the same time the first one was checked in, and his name was there. And so this person was systematically reading Prabhupada's books from the library. And I think he had gone up to maybe around the 5th or something canto that was out at that time. He had steadily been reading Prabhupada's books. And just to see that happening was a great tribute to Srila Prabhupada and a satisfaction for a Sankirtan devotee distributing in that form.
Wow. Many a times years pass by within the lives of practicing sadhakas, and they don't even cross over the first canto, the second canto, but for a student to actually read it, most satisfying, and a testament in the favor of how attractive the words of His Divine Grace are. That even in the middle of nowhere, somebody can take absolute shelter. Were you also curious to then find out the dorm where this person is, go and speak to him and ask him to join the temple with you or the party with you?
I didn't think that far, no. Next time I'll do that.
I would have said that would have been, I mean, I was amazed that how you were tracking, because I would say that would be the most innovative strategy. Okay, here are the people reading now. Let's track them down and let's get them to participate in the movement as well. Prabhu, so you travel through, I presume, all of the United States or most of it?
Yes,
for this service?
through the United States and Canada, we traveled 2 or 3 years we were doing that. Then some of the devotees went to Europe and began traveling and distributing books, Prabhupada's books in universities around Europe, including Eastern Europe. There's some pretty inspiring, intriguing, adventuresome stories of Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, then Ganesham Prabhu, traveling in Eastern Europe, distributing Prabhupada's books. And then, of course, in India itself, Mahavishnu Swami, Prabhu Vishnu, Prabhu, and others took up the BBT Library Party work, Bhima Prabhu, in India, visiting universities there as well.
How many universities or locations would you have sort of gone to, or including repeat visits in that period of 3 years, Prabhu?
Well, I don't know numbers, but I would say every major university in the United States we went to.
Yeah. And I'm sure generations of devotees and students will remain indebted to you and the party for doing so, because now the books are there. The books are there. Prabhu, earlier you mentioned that when you went to Washington, D.C., at that time, devotees started feeling that they must read more. There was an emphasis to read more, having more classes. You described about that. And over the years, when Srila Prabhupada was present and devotees started to read more, did you see any perceptible changes in the relationship between devotees or the way the society was evolving with this thirst on more classes and more sincerely churning the milk and reading the books?
Well, that's a little hard to answer that question for me, because during those times we were traveling Sankirtan party of brahmacharis, and we had our sadhana, which included reading Prabhupada's books every day individually, and that was sort of a strength that we needed for our service, to go out and do our service. And so we weren't in the temples, and so what was going on in the temples was just obviously we heard about it because we'd visit the temples on the weekends, but still we weren't so much a part of the temple culture and things like that. So how individual temples were dealing with, the emphasis on more classes, I can't really speak to that, other than obviously there was a desire to be receptive to that instruction because it was coming from Srila Prabhupada. And there must have been different attempts made in different ways to study Prabhupada's books.
Yes, Prabhu. Yes. And Prabhu, something that you like to share, if there was some positive, perceptible changes that you felt in your own personal life in those years, and especially in terms of interacting with other brahmacharis, other devotees who were on the party. I'm looking for instances where the reading of Prabhupada's books sort of did it really strengthen your relationship amongst devotees, and if there was a perceptible change. I ask you because you have so much experience, and often these are things that in our practice we look beyond, or we don't really observe this. But if you ever made these observations, because you all were definitely reading, like you said, it was part of your daily sadhana to read as well individually.
Well, when I was sent to join the library party, Rupanuga Prabhu, who sent me there, he explained to me that he was actually being a very kind benefactor to me, because he explained how I would get the chance, because all the devotees on the library party were brahmanas, advanced devotees, and he was actually giving me a chance to associate with a level of devotees and seriousness that may not have been in the local situation where I was in the temple. It was an opportunity for a brahmachari to get advanced association. And so I think that personally entering into that group of brahmacharis personally gave me a chance to mature a little bit in Krishna consciousness and to become a more serious devotee and strive for advancement. Being on the road constantly was another sort of austerity that was performed in this party. Obviously, traveling, we're not cooking. In those days, we weren't cooking. On weekends, we'd cook, but during the week, so life was a bit more austere in general. And there was, as you mentioned, the sadhana of reading Prabhupada's books. So for me, the experience was an opportunity to make advancement.
Yes.
And I think that was always a concern amongst the devotees that I associated with as a brahmachari, how to make spiritual advancement. And that's through association. And so we had a tight group of devotees on the library party that were good friends, that had a good competitive spirit to try to do the best for Srila Prabhupada. And maybe we were even a little proud, I think, although that's not necessarily a good thing. But our leader, Satrup Maharaj, wanted us to show, when we went on weekends, when we visited the temples on weekends, he wanted us to show that we could chant and dance wildly, with wild enthusiasm in Mangal Arati, to show that, traveling on the road as brahmacharis, not attached to a temple, but just going every day to shooting Prabhupada books. That was a way to advance ourselves in Krishna consciousness. So maybe we bought into that a little bit too.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I really appreciate who would want to disclose such candid details of the inner workings of the library party, but all with good intent, as they say it, all with such beautiful intent and so much service performed. Prabhu, after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance, or physical disappearance, over the last now 43 years, what has been your observation with respect to devotees reading Srila Prabhupada's books? Has the enthusiasm gone up, remained the same, gone down? What has transpired? If there is some observation that you've had over the years?
Well, any observation I would have obviously comes from me personally and doesn't necessarily represent the truth of any particular situation. I think that, but it may more reflect my own state of Krishna consciousness. I think that with time, the challenge of perceiving the ever-fresh nature of the spiritual instruction given in Srila Prabhupada's books, sometimes there's ups and downs in the faith in that very fact. I saw the little segment that you had with Ananda Tirtha's son, Raj Mohan, and how he was explaining, 11-year-old boy was explaining how, basically the books are fresh. Every time you go to them, there's newer and newer realization. So sometimes our determination and our realization of that may flag a little bit. We may tire somehow or another. But if and I've noticed that if one perseveres through that time, through that period, that sort of naturally comes as part of our previous material conditioning. If we persevere through that time, and I again speak personally, if we persevere through that time, then we can retaste the ever-fresh nature of Srila Prabhupada's books. And that has the effect of redoubling one's enthusiasm. And so I think I've seen that in the lives of devotee friends that I've known over the years, where there's a constant moving up in advancement, but that upward movement, if you picture a graph, it sort of like rises and dips. The trend is up always, but it rises and dips like that. And so you could look at that and think, oh, well, that's unfortunate, that's not good. But you could also look at it that despite the downs, there's always an up, and the general trend is up. And so what's driving it up what's driving up is more than what's driving it down. What's driving it up is understanding and the relevance of Srila Prabhupada's words to our actions on a daily basis. And what's down is our doubts, our fears that we come to Krishna consciousness with as part of our material conditioning. So
Yes,
that's
Prabhu.
an overview of the world in my point of view.
Well, whoever said that life is a straight line, let alone straight line up, must be dreaming. But Prabhu, we all want to double down, like you said. We all want to double down in absorbing ourselves in reading Srila Prabhupada's books. You very kindly shared one positive attitude, which is to persevere through those phases. What are the other positive attitudes, or what should be actually our attitude when we approach Srila Prabhupada's books?
Well, I think that one of the things that we used to do on the library party in our tight group of brahmacharis, which I think kept us together and helped us persevere in our service, was that we would read together. There was individual reading, but we'd read together and read to each other. When we came together on the weekends, someone would be cooking for everybody, and so we'd read while that person cooked. During the week when we were traveling, we were paired teams of two, and we would read as we were driving from one place to another. The books were always there, and reading Prabhupada's books were always there. It's sort of like a glue that was filled the gaps of time, and it was something that was there. And so I think that had a tremendous effect of increasing our ability to be Krishna conscious, and sort of was the medium of our association, reading Prabhupada's books at any time we had any spare time. It was filled in by reading Prabhupada's books.
So reading in association with other devotees, persevering through ups and downs, and also, using any moment that becomes available to absorb ourselves in hearing about Krishna. These are three things that I captured from what you just said, in terms of which will allow us also to double down our enthusiasm and see these instructions, the books, as ever fresh, wanting to pick them up again and again, many times over. Prabhu, are there some negative attitudes or some things that one must avoid when one is, trying to engage with Srila Prabhupada's divine instructions, or when one picks up a Bhagavatam or Bhagavad Gita? What is it that we must, some moods and attitudes that we must refrain from to not lose the taste?
Well, I think that we have to maintain a reverential attitude towards Prabhupada's books and the instructions that he says there, rather than trying to see it, the Bhagavatam and other books, in sort of a material light. When we do that, then so many things, sort of stand out to us and become more prominent in our minds than the spiritual instructions that's given in Srila Prabhupada's books. And of course, that leads to doubt. And these things, doubt, criticism, unfortunately, they're not, Srila Prabhupada, our guru, is not exempt from those kind of things when our minds start to betray us. And so, but if we maintain a reverential attitude towards the books always, then Krishna is reciprocal. Krishna, his basic relationship with us is reciprocal. as we surrender to him, he'll rewarding us accordingly. So if we have a critical attitude, fault-finding attitude, we'll find plenty of fault. We'll find plenty of fault. That's what we'll see. It'll jump out to us. But if we maintain a reverential attitude, which is how we should approach the Guru, how we should approach his books, how we should approach his instructions, if we have that reverential attitude, that'll protect us. It'll do more than protect us. It'll give us insight into things which are troubling to others that may not have that faith, that may be a little critical, that may be not as reverential. We'll be able to help them over those hurdles, those downs, as you call them, cycling up. We'll be able to help them simply based, not because we were more intelligent or we even studied the books more, but simply because we're reverential. That's such an important quality to have that we can never forget. And Prabhupada's books give us a chance to be reverential every day as we approach them.
Thank you, Prabhu. A prayerful mood is something that we must all keep in our heart when we approach this, in order to possibly hear Krishna through the pages of Srila Prabhupada's writings. Prabhu, I want to ask you a few other questions, which are, like you very nicely described, maybe some of them may not be necessarily true everywhere, but in some parts of ISKCON, it may be happening. So, in today's time and age, we are in a situation where there are so many books there. And there's a reverential attitude towards one spiritual master. And there's a reverential attitude that one must have towards His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada, who's our founder Acharya, our preeminent Siksha Guru. In this context, with a plethora of, in a nice way, so much spiritual literature out there, what is, in your view, the significance of Srila Prabhupada's books for ISKCON devotees?
Yeah, well, Srila Prabhupada's books can get lost in the field of spiritual literature that's out there.
Did you say can or did you say cannot?
Can. It okay. Can get lost. And in the minds of some. It may get lost in the cacophony of so many books out there and so many people saying so many things. But I think we have to resist that. One of the injunctions that's given, instruction by the Acharyas, is that, and Srila Prabhupada also repeated that, one should not read too many books. Yes. Now, Prabhupada in his books does say we should read this book, we should read that book. But there's so many books, we can get caught up in reading so many books and not spend the appropriate amount of time with Srila Prabhupada's books. If you have the nature of being academic or scholastic, studying books, then you have an obligation to give the appropriate amount of weight in terms of time and effort to Srila Prabhupada's books. That's part of the reverential attitude I'm speaking about.
Indeed. Yes, Prabhu.
If we read other books, then it should only be done in conjunction with Srila Prabhupada's books, or we should never lose Prabhupada's perspective that he gives in his writings in terms of how to understand these other books that may be there. Certainly, it's going to be different for every individual.
And, what would you say to someone if they approach you and say that my spiritual master, or not necessarily my spiritual master, but some of the senior disciples of my spiritual master have instructed me that I should first read the books of my spiritual master before I get the qualification to read Srila Prabhupada's books?
What would I say? quote, would I be on mic or off mic when I asked to make a comment? I mean, how can we say Srila Prabhupada is the preeminent Shiksha Guru of ISKCON? He's the founder, Acharya of ISKCON. And he was very concerned about being seen in and followed in his movement with him as the founder Acharya. What does it mean, founder Acharya? His teachings, his understanding of the Shastra are supreme for us as his disciples. We have to be clear about that. And so many people, so many devotees have written so many books, and they're wonderful. But they're wonderful because they take this attitude of following in Srila Prabhupada's footsteps in terms of philosophical presentation, in terms of emphasis in Krishna and understanding Krishna. And so when these things are followed, then we're on safe ground. Other than that, we could find ourselves in a situation that's not so conducive to our spiritual advancement. And
yes, Prabhu.
Yeah.
Prabhu, you gave a very, very succinct and beautiful definition of the founder Acharya. Could you please emphasize that for us again, that part where you said, what does it mean to be the founder Acharya of ISKCON?
Well, what does it mean to be the founder Acharya of ISKCON is that one's teachings, one's understanding of the Shastra, one's perspective on different questions that have been there and commented on by acharyas for centuries. Srila Prabhupada leads us through all that. And he wants to lead us through that. He's willing to lead us through that. He is leading us through that. But we also have to want that. And so we have to want to and that's how we should approach Srila Prabhupada's books.
Thank you.
And his service.
So beautiful, Prabhu. Thank you for sharing this very important attitude that all of us must have when we approach and when we use the word. Because often, we use the word, not often, but sometimes we use the word in a very light way. Srila Prabhupada is the founder Acharya. He's the preeminent Shiksha Guru. But this understanding, this perspective that you've shared with us is very important for us to really meditate. What does it mean? Prabhu, another situation, interesting one. Yeah. A manager approaches you and he says, I'm busy, like all managers in ISKCON are very busy. I'm busy with so many services that I have to perform. I really don't have time to read. I really don't have time to read every day or have, that as part of my sadhana. What would from your experience, from your observations, what would your response or advice be to ISKCON managers who get overwhelmed with service and sometimes no time to read?
Well, we shouldn't see our service as mundane. Actually, it's transcendental. And our experience of it can be transcendental. For instance, I don't have time. The question of not having time to read Prabhupada's books or to do any other service basically is coming from a position of not experiencing the spiritual nature of your engagement. Because if you can make the time, you mold your consciousness to read Prabhupada's books, to have that as a foundation, then you'll actually experience, and I've experienced it myself, you'll actually experience that time acts in ways in which are expanding. You'll find you do have time to do that and more because you're properly situated, you're properly focused. Maybe we've all had the experience in chanting our japa, for instance. When we chant our japa, if we're not concentrating our mind's going here and there, and we're trying very hard to control the mind. And so instead of chanting in a meditative way, we chant sort of like a more rajasic kind of way. We don't get ahead of time. Time stays ahead of us.
Yes.
But if we do it in a meditative frame of mind, keeping our concentration on Krishna and just chanting not slowly, but chanting methodically, time seems to expand. And it's almost like a spiritual experience. Time seems to expand. And so someone who says they don't have enough time means that they're not putting the proper focus. If you put the proper focus, then time will expand and you'll be able to have so much time to do your service.
Prabhu, have you had any personal experience of friends or members within ISKCON who, if they were not reading, what really happened in their life? If somebody's not taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada's books? It's almost like a rhetorical question, but I do want to hear from you, because when somebody's had decades of experience with the movement and they've had observations, then those observations are a polite reminder, sometimes a wake-up call for others who may be walking that path.
Well, I think it's unfortunate that over the years, some devotees who we may have been very close with are no longer on a daily basis, or maybe even at all, practicing Krishna consciousness. And if I had to go over the individual cases and give reasons why this happened, I think that it would point directly to a deficit in hearing from Srila Prabhupada and reading his books. These things are what keep us alive, just like a plant. Plant may be growing. If you don't water it, it starts to wither and lean over and everything. But if you water it, if it's not dead, but you water it, then it springs back to life. It becomes green, it springs up, it's up straight again all of a sudden. And things are good. If you don't water, then it goes back down. If you water, it goes back up. And I suppose there's only a certain number of times you can do that before the plant dies. But the point I'm trying to make is that our service may be like that. We may become a little lethargic, uninspired. We're drooping, we're wilting like that plant. But if we pour the water of Srila Prabhupada's instructions, his books, if we read his books, then we can also become rejuvenated, just like that plant. And so I think that Krishna consciousness doesn't go away one day to the next, I guess, unless there's some huge aparad. But it has this tendency of wilting slowly. So we can fix that by watering it with the Prabhupada's instructions, his words, his books, and we can be revived. Some people do that and some people don't, and that those that don't, unfortunately, will have to take up Krishna consciousness from where they left off at another time.
Well, I want to be alive. I'm sure everybody who's listening wants to be alive. So you've given us the magic formula, which is we must hear from Srila Prabhupada through his lectures, through his books, to remain rejuvenated. We really want, because that's what we're really after. We all want to be happy. And
I'm preaching to myself here, by the way, to all the listeners. I'm preaching to myself.
No, Prabhu, definitely not. You're encouraging us, and we're very grateful for your encouragement. Very grateful for your encouragement, Prabhu. Prabhu, would you like to share something, some excerpt, something which is close to your heart from Srila Prabhupada's book, something that you're reading recently? How is it now? 50 years, almost 50 years of reading Prabhupada's books. do you still get an opportunity and time to read every day yourself?
I try to. There's three types of reading that I do.
Yes.
One is as a sadhana, to try to read every day something, even if it's only one verse, to read every day as part of my sadhana. And to do that, right now I'm reading Chaitanya Charitamrita, so going through that, and the reading is all the verses and purports and everything through like that. So that to have the patience to go through the book like that, reading it from one volume to the next. I do it as a sadhana, just like we do our sadhana, chanting 16 rounds every day. Like that. So that's one type of reading. Another type of reading that I do is if a question comes up in my service, sometimes as a GBC member, some devotees may have some philosophical questions, or in discussion with my friends, some point may come up where we're discussing the philosophy and we want to try to find out more about it. And so those kind of situations, that's the second type of reading, doing research on particular questions that come up, and having a general overview of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Obviously is helpful in that regard, because you go and read Prabhupada's reports to deal with that particular question that's come up. And the third type of reading that I do is similar to the second, but whenever I have classes or seminars or presentations to make, you obviously study with the goal of teaching it. And so that's a bit of a different type of reading that is done. But I think those three different types, and there may be other variations here and there. For instance, if you're waiting for something or somebody and you just pick up one of Prabhupada's books or BTG or something like that, and you're just reading in general, and something may strike you that comes up. And so in any types of these readings, some striking, interesting revelation may be made. But at least those three types, basic types of reading I do. And in my reading of Chaitanya Charitamrita recently, I'm reading about the Lord Chaitanya's explanation of the Atmarama verse. And wow, it's amazing. But what maybe is more practically amazing for our audience here today is that the story of Mrigari the hunter is told by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in explaining the Atmarama verse. One of the meanings of the Atmarama verse, he explains it by the Mrigari the hunter story. And there, Prabhupada makes the point about how Krishna takes care of his devotees. And we always hear that. We sort of hear that Krishna will take care of his devotees, especially as grihastas, we may have worry, oh, Krishna take care of me and my family, how will I do everything, meet all my obligations. And we may have heard that Krishna says he takes care of his devotees, he provides what the devotees lack, he cares what they need. But in that story of Mrigari the hunter, Prabhupada explicitly says things that to grihastas, or at least he was specifically talking to me when I was reading it. Don't doubt that Krishna provides. He's the one that's providing for you, not your job or whatever you may have. He's directly providing you. He's the source of your maintenance, not these other things. And so it was jarring statements, because that's where the doubt may enter into the mind, particularly, as I say, in the Grihastha ashram, I have so many responsibilities. How will I fulfill them all from trying to do service? I've got no time. But Krishna, Prabhupada pointing out directly to us, don't you worry. Krishna's will take, he's the one that's maintaining you, not these other things. And so it's kind of a jarring realization, experience, to not get distracted by material necessity, but go on with your service, and Krishna will take care of you, just like he took care of Magari.
We all want that shelter. We want that shelter where Krishna is taking care of us. I recall, probably maybe incorrectly, please correct me if I'm wrong, but in the same purport, Prabhupada also writes that both husband and wife, they actually received more than necessary. And in their conduct, it is explained that how they would turn people back. They would turn people back, the villagers. So not just provide it, like there's a popular saying in, in India, in other places also, in other countries also, that when God gives, he gives with 10 hands. I remember that sequence. I said, wow, not only do I have to worry, I have to start worrying about sending people back. That's amazing. I like that to happen to me. Wow, Prabhu, every word there in Prabhupada's writings is an impetus for us to just build that mood of surrender.
Right.
So beautiful. So 4 types of reading. So we heard today from Sesha Prabhu 4 types of reading he does. I wish we were doing 1 or 2. The 4th type, of course, being whenever you pick up something and there's a revelation. That's also very exciting. But 4 types. Prabhu, in your busy schedule, with so many responsibilities, it's very, very inspiring for us to know that as part of your sadhana, as part of your service as a GBC, and also as an educator, you take shelter in Srila Prabhupada's books. I request everyone, including myself, of course, I'm speaking to myself, that we also follow in your footsteps and take shelter of Srila Prabhupada's books the same way that you've done. You've performed service in many ways to Srila Prabhupada's books. You continue to do it now and sharing these beautiful, beautiful realizations that you're having. Thank you for this. Prabhu, any parting message that you'd like to share with all of us to inspire us to read Srila Prabhupada's books every day?
I can tell you one story. This is another one of my favorite stories. It happened to me on Sankirtan, and it has to do with reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And don't ask me to explain it, but I do have a reference that I'm going to give you at the end of the story to make sure that you don't think I'm just making this up. I was on Sankirtan. This is many years ago when I was a brahmachari, on Sankirtan here in the North Florida area. And I went up to an old Black American gentleman who was sitting in a beat up pickup truck in a parking lot at a shopping center. And I was showing him Srila Prabhupada's books, trying to distribute to him. And he gave me one of those looks, just like that librarian looked at me before. He gave me one of those looks. And he said, "Do you know what my favorite book is?" And I was expecting the guy to say the Holy Bible, He didn't have a ring. I was really expecting this guy to come off as a real Christian kind of guy and to tell me, I should be worshiping Jesus Christ or whatever. But what shocked me was he pulled up to my sight from his seat in the car, in his truck, an old, tattered, and beat up copy of Nectar of Devotion. And it was obviously a well-read book many times. And he explained, "This is my favorite book, The Nectar of Devotion." If there was anybody that when you looked at them, you wouldn't think that they had any knowledge of Krishna or a devotee or anything, it was this fellow. But he said that's his favorite book. And so he was reading Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion, obviously over and over again. I mean, such an elevated work. Obviously, he was getting some real taste from reading that book. And even though he was so out of place, it seemed so out of place, so fantastic that I could even be meeting this person. That's what he said. To the point where I think maybe it was Rupa Goswami himself just coming to check up on my sankirtan. And just so that it's not a single instance, and I'm not making this up, my godbrother, Vaninath Vasu Prabhu, had the same experience with this, I guess it was the same gentleman, where he went up to him and the guy told him his favorite book was Nectar Devotion. And that was also in this North Florida area. And so did one of our god sisters, Akuti Devi Dasi, very dedicated and sincere disciple of Srila Prabhupada. She also had the same experience with this man. So somehow or another, this person is running around out there. Not anymore. This was back in the 70s when I met him. But such an amazing thing, because he was obviously getting a real taste from reading Srimad Bhagavatam. Let's assume he was an ordinary man. Somehow or another, Krishna and Prabhupada were inspiring him enough to read that book over and over and over again to try to understand Prema Bhakti. And if he was some special individual that comes down to test his devotees, then how fortunate were those of us that got a chance to interact with him and see his dedication, which can still inspire us in our own study of nectar devotion to this very day. So that's another far out Sankirtan story that I have, meeting who knows who.
In either case, like you said, in either case, we must all take respite and feel that we can read, and we should read every day. And even something as difficult as Nectar of Devotion can reveal. Sesha Prabhu, thank you, and thank you for inspiring us, sharing with us such lovely and heart-touching realizations, pastimes that you had in serving Srila Prabhupada's books. I hope that we'll get to speak to you again, hear again from you on this very important topic of reading every day. I'd like to thank all the viewers who are participating with us in this project, that please share it with as many friends that you can, because if somehow or the other we can encourage everyone to read Prabhupada's books every day, then our service to Srila Prabhupada will become more and more fulfilling for us, for the pleasure of His divine grace. Thank you, Prabhu. All glories to Srila Prabhupada, and all glories to His transcendental book. Jai, and all glories to His transcendental books. Hare
Krishna. Thank you.